Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is, well, pretty simple. We take the sources you share with us, the articles, the data, and we pull out the most important bits of knowledge. We're basically giving you the shortcut to being well informed with all the context you need, just, without the information overload. Today, we're doing a deep dive that's uh, intensely psychological. We're looking at that fundamental barrier that just stops millions of language learners in their tracks: motivation. Specifically for English conversation practice, for anyone out there trying to get fluent. The sources we've looked at today, they cut right to the core of this block. We've boiled the main insight down to one single essential strategy. It's so blunt it almost feels like a challenge, really. It's stop waiting for perfect English and just begin. And that command, that's the entire blueprint.
It is, and what's so fascinating here is that the source doesn't waste any time talking about how to find motivation, which is what most people think they need, right? Instead, it just pivots immediately to the action. So this isn't just, some common sense advice. It's a huge mindset shift. It recognizes that motivation isn't what you need before you act. It's the result of the action. You're building a loop that feeds itself.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because the first half of that command, stop waiting for perfect English, that seems to address this monumental delay so many of us face. I mean, we all get that practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
But for conversation specifically, why is that desire for perfection such a potent roadblock? Maybe even toxic.
It's toxic because in conversation, perfection isn't a real goal. It's not something you can measure. It's this imagined static destination. Learners picture this flawless, ideal version of themselves speaking English, and then they immediately compare it to how they actually sound right now, stumbling and all. And that comparison, it always ends in paralysis.
It's a recipe for feeling bad about yourself.
It is. And if we look at the bigger picture, the sources suggest this waiting comes from what psychologists call the fear of negative evaluation. FNE.
The fear of being judged.
Exactly. For a language learner, every single conversation is a public performance. So if you feel like you have to reach some external standard first, master all the irregular verbs, learn 5,000 words.
Right.
Before you're even allowed to speak, you're just creating an excuse to avoid that fear.
I see that. So it's not just about being a good student. It's sophisticated fear management that's disguised as studying. You're operating as if conversation is the final exam. But like you said, if you wait until you've absorbed everything, all the grammar, the vocabulary, you're kind of buying into a fixed mindset about it all.
Precisely. The fixed mindset says, I'm either good at this or I'm not.
And if I make a mistake, it just proves I'm not good at it yet.
Exactly. But conversation practice demands a growth mindset. It requires you to see mistakes as necessary data points for getting better. Real conversation is messy. It's dynamic. It's error-prone by design. The source is basically telling you to stop treating a dynamic process like it's a static test.
And that takes us right back to motivation. If the conversation is the reward for all your hard work, and you keep delaying that reward forever by setting the bar at perfect, you're just starving your own engine.
That's it. That waiting period creates what we could call a huge motivation deficit.
A motivation deficit. I like that.
You're demanding all this intellectual effort, studying, reviewing with absolutely zero psychological payoff. The brain needs those little hits of success to keep going. The second you actually start speaking, you create a chance for that internal reward, even if the sentence is totally broken.
Right.
If you wait 6 months to try and say a perfect paragraph, your engine is going to run out of fuel long before you ever get there.
That distinction between functional communication and flawless grammar is just so key. The sources kept hitting that point that conversational English is a tool, not a trophy.
It is. The waiting trap assumes it's a trophy. Think about academic English versus conversational English. Academic English is all about precision, logic, structure. Conversational English is about speed, clarity, connection. They have different goals.
They serve different masters.
Right. And when you focus on perfection, you're applying academic standards to a conversational task. That mismatch is what causes the paralysis.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, the solution. That powerful, almost blunt instruction. Just begin.
So if we accept that this fear, this FNE, and the motivation deficit are the barriers, what does just begin actually mean for someone who's paralyzed every day?
The power is in shifting from motivation to
Volition.
the willful act of committing to do something no matter how you feel about it. The source suggests we stop waiting to feel ready, and instead we focus on setting up what are called implementation intentions.
Okay, that sounds technical. What is that practically? It's actually super practical. Instead of saying, I'll feel motivated to speak English tomorrow, you create a really clear, low stakes plan. Something like, when I sit down to check my email at 9 a.m., I will record a 30-second voice note describing my breakfast.
So it's an if-then plan. If this happens, then I will do that.
Exactly. That simple structure bypasses your internal critic. The decision is already made. You just execute the step.
So just begin is more than just a pep talk. It's a structural approach. It lets you skip all that elaborate planning and mental prep that was part of the waiting game.
Yeah.
And when you commit to a tiny action, you're basically giving yourself permission for the result to be, well, not very good.
Yes, exactly. And that raises a really important point the sources get into. If you are a beginner, by definition, the quality has to be secondary to the action itself. The goal shifts entirely. It goes from speak well, a perfectionist goal, to speak often, a mastery goal.
Volume and consistency.
They override that internal demand for perfection.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second. That's what we do in the deep dive. If you just begin with no preparation, aren't you risking, I don't know, creating bad habits that are really hard to fix later? Is the source just encouraging sloppy language?
That's a crucial question. And yes, the source acknowledges that risk, but it counters that the inertia of inaction is far, far more damaging than the inertia of bad habits.
Inaction teaches you nothing.
Right. Action, even if it's flawed, gives you immediate, real data. The key is that just begin has to be paired with volume. If you speak often, you're constantly testing little hypotheses about the language. You'll run into situations where your imperfect sentence just doesn't work, or where a native speaker subtly models the correct way back to you. This messy process of trial and error, what's called retrieval practice, is neurologically way better for learning than just passive listening or reading.
So you learn because you're making mistakes, not in spite of them.
Yes, you're not supposed to avoid them.
That just flips the entire problem on its head. You're no longer measuring success by how few errors you make, but by how many times you try. I remember the source mentioned this hypothetical learner, right, who spent 40 hours perfecting one chapter of German grammar before
Yes.
trying to ask a simple question in the real world. That's 40 hours of zero functional output, zero reward, zero momentum.
That's the perfect illustration of the motivation deficit. That student was completely trapped.
Yeah.
On the other hand, a learner who makes 10 functional but maybe grammatically flawed attempts in a day,
Yeah.
they get 10 little successes, 10 little dopamine hits, even if they use the wrong tense every single time.
That tiny success of just being understood,
Mm-hmm.
that's the internal reward that makes you try again tomorrow.
It generates its own momentum.
So it reframes the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
We're always taught that motivation comes first, then practice. But the source is insisting that the practice itself, no matter the outcome, is what fuels the desire to continue. You're using conversation practice to generate motivation. It becomes a self-sustaining loop.
So let's synthesize these two halves because they are so deeply connected.
Okay.
You have the psychological problem of the waiting trap, and then you have the practical cure of just taking action. The learner has to understand that perfection is the enemy of progress. And this deep dive really reveals that the true shortcut to fluency is realizing that motivation is not external. It's not going to come from a flashcard app or a perfect textbook.
It has to be internal.
It's internal, and it is driven only by the act of conversing. The waiting trap makes you feel like you need to consume more information.
Because you never feel prepared enough.
Never. The action command forces you to produce information, which is the only way to actually make what you've learned stick.
So, what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? The ultimate takeaway from this material really is an immediate call to action. It's a license to drop your internal critic, because that critic is actively stopping your brain from getting the reward it needs to keep going. The sources are fundamentally telling us that if you're waiting for the perfect conversation partner, or the perfect time of day, or the perfect vocabulary level, you are actively sabotaging your own motivation.
And that functional output is the key. You have to overcome the inertia of inaction, the waiting, before you can even start to worry about the quality. Every single time you execute one of those implementation intentions, no matter how small or flawed it is, you are strengthening the pathways in your brain that support consistent behavior.
It changes the definition of success.
It does. You're no longer aiming for a flawless performance goal, like acing a test. You're aiming for a robust mastery goal, like speaking 10 times a day, every day. And the pursuit of mastery through volume is inherently motivating. You're guaranteed to have small wins every single day.
So we focus this whole deep dive on this one single powerful strategy from the sources. The critical importance of just starting right now instead of waiting for ideal conditions. It's permission to be imperfect. And that, ironically, is the biggest and most sustainable boost to your motivation you could possibly get.
Which leads us to the final thought for you to consider. And it's based directly on this theme of just beginning and ignoring perfection. If the goal is immediate practice, what is the lowest stakes, most flawed 5-word sentence you can commit to saying out loud today? To another person, or even just to your phone's voice recorder. That small functional beginning, that tiny act of volition, that is where your lasting motivation actually starts.